Today. Thank you for your Sabbath, Lord. Thank you for being in our lives. Thank you for everything you give us, Lord. Thank you for leading us in righteousness and teaching us your ways. Lord, I pray that your word would sink into our hearts, Lord. That we fully realise how impactful it is. And how wonderful it is. Lord, I pray for Jamie Bauer, Zach's wife. I pray that you'd heal her, Lord. Their family's a similar age to mine, and I can't imagine what they'd be going through. Lord, I pray for JP, that you'd bless his words today, Lord. That we get to learn more about you today and understand more. Thank you, Lord, for everything you give us. Praise your holy name. Amen.
Okay, so the Torah portion today, as I think most people are aware, is going to be a very, very long one. I don't know exactly how long. I know it's going to be 5 parts long. I don't know how long each one of those parts is. So what I'd say to people is maybe just stay for the first 3 parts, the normal length of the Torah portion, and then go after that, because the 4th part I know in particular is going to be a long one. So in the first part I'm going to actually cover the Torah portion itself, cover what it says about the sacrifices and the offerings in the temple, tabernacle. In the second part I'm going to look at I'm not sure if people are aware of verses where it says things like, sacrifices and burnt offerings you did not desire. I think there's some stuff in the New Testament as well as quite a lot in the Old Testament. So I'm going to start by looking at those verses, because it seems to be completely at odds with the Torah portion, which says that he does desire sacrifices and offerings. So we'll look at that at the beginning, and then at the end of that part I'm going to look at the 3rd temple that is being built in Israel, or the 3rd temple that's being built in Israel. A number of people have got in touch and they've said, you know, what's your opinion basically on the 3rd temple? So I don't want to offer my opinion, I want to show what Scripture says about it, because it's quite clear from Scripture where we stand. And then in the 3rd part, I'm not sure if people are aware, but a while back I started the series on the book of Hebrews. I did the first 2 parts, or the first 2 chapters of the book of Hebrews, and I never got around to finishing it. And it is something that I intend to do, but in the 3rd part I'm going to teach the entire book of Hebrews, so that's probably going to be quite a long part. I'm not going to go through it verse by verse, but I'm taking significant portions from each chapter, if not the whole chapter, so I teach on Hebrews. In the 4th part, we're going to start looking at the fact that we offer spiritual sacrifices, because the Torah portion shows us about offering sacrifices in the physical temple. We need to learn about offering spiritual sacrifices in us as the temple of the Ruach, and us corporately as the temple of the Ruach. And what we're going to look at in the 4th part is the idea of the mincha offering. We'll see what that is when we go through the first part, but basically it's presents to Yehovah. A present would be a good way of translating it. And one of the things that I'm going to look at in that part, a major thing that I'm looking at, is tithing. A number of people have got in touch with me again and asked for things on tithing. It's probably in the top 10 things that I get asked about. And when I tried to cut a video together on tithing, I thought there's just nothing that I've got that's comprehensive enough that teaches all of it in one place. It's all kind of dotted around in Torah portions. So that'll be the 4th part. And then in the 5th part, we'll be looking at the other 4 spiritual sacrifices that we offer in us as the temple of the Ruach. So the Torah portion's called Vayikra. And Charlie last week did the last 4 Torah portions in the book of Exodus, and he brought us to the end of the book of Exodus so that we could start in what we call Leviticus. The name Leviticus obviously makes us think of the Levites, and you know, you get people talk about the Levitical law and all of that sort of stuff. But Vayikra is the Hebrew word that the book of Leviticus is called, and it means, and he called. We've seen before that when you've got a vav at the beginning, that's an and. A yod is he, vayeh, and he. Then you've got a verb, which is called, or kara in Hebrew. So it's Vayikra, and he called. So we start in chapter 1. Oh, actually, put this picture in, because this Torah portion needs to be dedicated to someone. Last time when I did a really long Torah portion, I did Torah portion Toldot, and I dedicated it to this person. It's Dylan Wright, okay, someone who watches from the US with their family. And I dedicated that, but that Torah portion ends up not being all Torah, but 2 of the 5 parts of that Torah portion were actually history. They turned out to be the history of the Jewish dispersion. Okay, so this is actually a picture of her upon hearing the news that the Torah portion was dedicated to her. Her dad took a picture of her. This is my artist impression of her face upon realizing that 2/5 of it were history. So don't worry, Dylan, it's okay. This one's dedicated to you, and this one is all 5 parts of Torah. So, in the first verse of Leviticus, it says, and Yehovah called. Okay, but we've just seen that it's actually, and he called, Vayikra. When you've got something that's in the third person and it's a he, you look to who it's talking about. So the translators have taken a bit of a liberty here, and they've said, well, it's talking about Yehovah, so instead of starting the whole book of Leviticus with, and he called, they've made it, and Yehovah called to Moshe, and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when any of you brings an offering to Yehovah, you bring your offering of the livestock, of the herd, or of the flock. Now, what I'm going to show here, and in several parts during this, we've seen before in one regard. We've seen an aspect of these sort of things before. But as I'm going through these things, I hope to show you these things in a new light that you've not seen them in before, in new contexts. So these words, bring and offering, are extremely important words. Not in the English, but in the Hebrew. Okay, so here's Blue Letter Bible, breaks it down, and we've got bring, and we've got offering in the English, and in the Hebrew it is karav and korban. Now, I don't know how well you can see it from there, and we'll look at it closer in a second, but those 2 words are very, very similar. You've got the kof, the resh, and the beit in each of the words, and that's because they are related. So the word for offering is korban. This is the word korban. It's an offering or an oblation. That's not really very helpful. That's just how the King James translators have translated it. Here's the definition that Strong's give. It says something brought near the altar, a sacrificial present, oblation that is offered, or an offering. Okay? And we can see that it's a noun. It's a name. And we know that in Hebrew, names and adjectives, descriptions, come from verbs. They come from the thing that that person or thing does. So the verb root of this noun is this word, and that's karav. That's the word which was described as bring, or translated as bring. So this is a verb, and it means to come near, to approach, enter into, or draw near. Doesn't really mean bring. It's something that you draw near. So what it's saying is when you draw near with a korban, korban being a noun from that verb, so korban is a thing by which you draw near. So when you draw near with the thing by which you draw near is more literally what it says. But the English translators have done a good enough job. Yehovah called to Moshe, spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any of you karav, when any of you draws near with a means to draw near to Yehovah, because that's what the sacrifices and the offerings were. Okay, you got the pagans, they offer sacrifices and offerings to their God, and what they want to do is they want to appease their God. They want to offer some blood so that their God stays away from them, because their gods are scary. Their God's like the God of thunder and the God of war. Or even if it's the god of the grain or the harvest, they want to appease that god so that they don't see that God's wrath. That's not what the sacrifices and offerings in the temple were about. They were about actually drawing close to Yehovah. They were about bringing something of value of yours to Yehovah to strengthen the relationship between you. So speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any of you draws near with the means to draw near to Yehovah, you draw near with your means to draw near of the livestock, of the herd, or of the flock. So what I want you to notice is that Yehovah is very precise. When he asks for something, he says, okay, you can bring me gifts. You can draw near to me in my holiness, in the Holy of Holies, you can draw near to me. But if you are to do so, you have to draw near in obedience. And for that to be manifest, he says, these are the rules, basically. You draw near to me and you follow these rules. If you want to bring me an offering, you bring me an offering according to this. And he's very, very precise. So here's the word that we saw as karav. And as you can see now that it's bigger, it's a kof, a resh, and a beit. And a beit can be pronounced with a B or a V sound. Here it's a V sound, and it's karav. Here we've got the word korban. So this is the verb to draw near, and this is korban. This is the means by which you draw near, the thing that you bring, the offering that you bring. And you can see here, kof, resh, beit, it's the first part of the word. And we've got this letter on the end, which is a nun. When you see a nun on the end of a word, it can look like this. So it goes from karav to korban with different vowels, but they're related to one another. In Genesis 20, verse 4, we can see how this word karav is used in its normal sense of the word. Because it's not always just used of drawing close to Yehovah. It can be used of drawing close to anyone. However, Avimelech had not karaved her. He'd not drawn near to her. In Genesis 47, we can see it used in a figurative sense. It says, and the time for Yisrael to die drew near. So it's the time that drew near in this sense. So this is what we're doing to Yehovah. We're drawing near to him, and he tells us how we can do that. Numbers 1:51 says, and when the dwelling place is to go forward, the Levites take it down, and when the dwelling place is to be set up, the Levites set it up. And the stranger who karevs, very closely similar word, for all intents and purposes, it's the same word, okay? Anyone who draws near is put to death. So this is the stranger. Someone, as we looked at the stranger, it's someone who comes outside of the Torah requirements. They will be counted as a stranger. When they come near, they're to be put to death. So how do you not be a stranger? Well, you approach, you draw near to him according to the requirements that he gives in this Torah portion. Exodus 3 verse 5, when Yehovah calls to Moshe out of the bush, and he said, do not karav here, do not draw near here. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you're standing is set apart ground. So again, he's very precise, because he knows that in his holiness, if people approach him in their uncleanness or in their profane state, that it may well cause their death. So that's why we're learning about what we're learning. So it's the first two verses that we saw. When you draw near with your means to draw near, make sure it's of the livestock, of the herd, or the flock. If his means of drawing near is a burnt offering, it says in the English. The Hebrew, it says in olah. Okay, and it's from the word Allah, which means to ascend. So sometimes this is translated as ascending offering, but what I want you to take note of is that there aren't two words in the Hebrew. It's not the word for burnt and then the word for offering. It's just an olah. That's what he's offering. So if his means of drawing near is an olah of the herd, let him bring a male, a perfect one. Let him draw near with it at the door of the tent of meeting for his acceptance. And it says before Yehovah, but we know this word. We know the word panim, and it means presence as well. So it's let him draw near with it at the door of the tent of meeting for his acceptance in the presence of Yehovah, because that's what he's doing, isn't it? He's coming into the presence of Yehovah. Yehovah's right there in the Holy of Holies. So he comes to the door of the tent of meeting to the presence of Yehovah. Now this is interesting. Okay, we think, don't we, of animal sacrifices. We think when you brought an animal to the priest would kill the animal and offer it. It's not what actually happens. Let him bring his offering, and he shall lay his hand on the head of the olah, and it shall be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him, and he shall slaughter the bull in the presence of Yehovah. So when people were bringing offerings, in certain cases, and we'll look at the different offerings, but in the case of the olah, certainly, he would kill the offering that he brought. And the sons of Aharon, the priests, shall draw near with the blood and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar which is at the door of the tent of meeting. So outside of the tabernacle there was the altar. And if anything even touched the horns of the altar, it would be made holy. So the priests were the ones who would draw near to the altar, and they would sprinkle the blood around, the person having killed the sacrifice himself. And he shall skin the burnt offering. This he shall is the priest. He shall skin the olah and cut it into pieces. And the sons of Aharon, the priest, shall put the fire on the altar and lay the wood in order on the fire. And the sons of Aharon, the priest, shall arrange the pieces with the head, the fat on the wood which is on the fire on the altar. But its entrails and its legs he washes with water. And the priest shall burn all of it on the altar as an olah. And then it says an offering made by fire. Okay, now it's not 4 different words, offering made by fire. In the Hebrew, it's one word, it's an isha. So we've got an olah, which is a burnt offering, and a burnt offering is a type of isha. An isha is an offering made by fire. And you'll see that everything that was offered to Yehovah pretty much was an offering made by fire, not just a burnt offering. See how the English can be confusing. A sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And if his means of drawing near is from the flock, from the sheep, or from the goats, as an olah, let him bring a male, a perfect one. And he shall slaughter it on the north side of the altar in the presence of Yehovah, and the sons of Aharon, the priest, shall sprinkle its blood on the altar all around. And he shall cut it into pieces with its head and its fat. Again, that's the priest that's doing it at this point. And the priest shall arrange them on the wood which is on the fire on the altar. But the entrails and the legs he washes with water. This is the priest still. And the priest shall he shall draw near with it all and burn it on the altar. It is an olah, an isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. Okay, so you're following. An olah is a type of isha. An isha is an offering made by fire. An olah is a burnt offering, which is a type of isha. And the olah of his means of drawing near to Yehovah, if the olah is of birds, then he shall draw near with his offering of turtle doves or young pigeons. And the priest shall draw near with it to the altar, and shall wring off its head, and burn it on the altar, and its blood shall be drained out at the side of the altar. And he shall remove its crop with its feathers, and throw it beside the altar on the east side into the place for ashes. And he shall split it at its wings, the priest still, and shall not sever it. And the priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is an olah, an isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. So this is the burnt offering that they would offer. We see in Genesis 8 verse 20 that these olah, or as we see the plural of it is olot, okay, that they were not new things. When you've got a masculine plural, it's im. You get cherubim or Elohim. Okay, when it's a feminine plural, the ending is ot. For burnt offering or for olah, it's olot. And we see Noach built an altar to Yehovah, took of every clean beast and of every clean bird, and offered olot on the altar. Genesis 22 verse 2, we see Yehovah himself calling for an olah. It says, and he said, take your son now, your only son Yitzchak, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as an olah on one of the mountains which I command you. Exodus 10:25. Okay, and this is going to show us that both Moshe and the Pharaoh of Egypt were familiar with what an olah was. But Moshe said, you yourself are to provide us with sacrifices and olot to prepare for Yehovah or Elohim. So this is something that was known before the Torah was given on Sinai. So Leviticus 2 says, and when anyone draws near with a mincha, and we need to understand what a mincha is, because it's translated grain offering, but again, there's not two words. It's not a word for grain and then a word for offering. It's a mincha. In the context of Leviticus 2, the mincha that would be given, and we'll see what a mincha is, the mincha was grain, which is why it's translated as grain offering. But there's nothing in the text to suggest it's a grain offering. We'll see, in fact, from the rest of Scripture what a mincha is. So when anyone draws near with a mincha to Yehovah, his means of drawing near is to be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. Now, all of these things in this society were very, very valuable things. Fine flour, oil, frankincense. So Yehovah says, okay, if you want to bring a gift to me, that's fine. You can bring a gift to me, but make it of the most expensive, valuable stuff that you have. What it's actually about is about a child giving a present to their father. That's really the picture that we should get. We're used to these English Bible translations which make it sound all stern and weird. Genesis 32, 13 to 15 says, and he spent the night there and took what came to his hand as a mincha for Esav his brother. Okay, so he's going to give a mincha to Esav. What does he give? 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. No grain, because mincha doesn't mean grain offering. He wasn't taking a grain offering to Esav. He was taking a present to him, or a gift. Genesis 43, verse 11, and their father Yisrael said to them, this is to the brothers, to Joseph's brothers, if so, then do this. Take some of the best fruit of the land in your vessels and bring a mincha down for the man. A little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds, no grain. Okay, because that's not what a mincha is. Genesis 43, 25 to 26. And they made the mincha ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they were to eat there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the mincha, which was in their hand, into the house, and bowed before, it says, but it's in the presence of him to the earth. So here we've got an actual picture of us drawing near to Yehovah with the mincha and bowing in his presence. 1 Kings 4:21, and Shlomo, which is Solomon, was ruling over all kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, for as far as the borders of Mitzrayim. They brought presents, they brought minchat, again this is the plural, they brought minchat and served Shlomo all the days of his life. So here we have a king being honored with minchat, which is what we should be familiar with. If we're reading it in the Hebrew and we've read through the Bible, we'd be like, oh yeah, look, there's that thing, that's what they're offering them, even if we didn't have a proper idea of the translation. Judges 3:15 to 17 says, and when the children of Yisrael cried out to Yehovah, Yehovah raised up a savior for them, Ehud, son of Gerah, a Binyamite, a man impeded in his right hand, and by him the children of Yisrael sent a mincha to Eglon, king of Moab. Okay, so here we have another king that is being honored with a mincha. And Ehud made himself a sword. It was double-edged and a cubit in length, and he girded it under his long robe and on his right thigh. And he drew near with the mincha to Eglon, king of Moab. So again, we've got this picture of them drawing near to the king with a mincha. It was a means by which he drew near to him. Now it says here, now Eglon was a very fat man, and the purpose in him drawing near to him was actually so that he could push this sword into him, and then it would be swallowed up by the fat. So this is a very different drawing near, but still we get the picture. 1 Samuel 10:24-27 says, "And Shemuel said to all the people, 'Do you see him whom Yehovah has chosen, that there is none like him among all the people?' And all the people shouted and said, 'Let the king live.'" So this is King Saul. Shemuel declared to the people the rulings of the kingdom and wrote it in a book and placed it in the presence of Yehovah. And Shemuel sent all the people away, each to his house. And Shaul went to his house too, to Giv'ah, and with him went brave men whose hearts Elohim had touched. But the sons of Belial, and that's a word that you're going to see a couple of other times in the Torah portion, it means worthlessness. You know, like you get the son of perdition and those sort of things, those the devil being the father of lies. Belial just means worthlessness. So they were the sons of worthlessness. And they said, "What, does this one save us?" And they despised him and brought him no minchat. But he kept silent. So you can see that this bringing of minchat to the king is something that they were familiar with. 2 Samuel 8:2 says, "He also smote Moab and measured them off with a line, causing them to lie down on the earth. With 2 lines he measured off those to be put to death, and with 1 complete line those to be kept alive. And the Moabites became David's servants and brought minchat to him." That's how you honor the king. 1 Kings 10:24-25, "And all the earth sought the presence of Shlomo to hear his wisdom, which Elohim had put in his heart. And they were each bringing his mincha, objects of silver, objects of gold, and garments, and armor, spices, horses, mules, the matter of a year by year." So again, no grain. No one's bringing any grain when they bring a minchat. The reason that we bring grain to Yehovah is because he says, when you bring me a minchat, make it grain, make it fine flour, make it oil, make it frankincense. Genesis 33:9-11. Because I put this in because I think that people have in their heads the idea of, why would I be bringing gifts to Yehovah? I'm pretty sure that Yehovah's got enough stuff. He doesn't need any of my stuff. But Esav said, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." This is when he tries to bring him a mincha. And Yaakov says, "No, please, if I found favor in your eyes, then receive my mincha from my hand." This word favor is the word chen in Hebrew. It's grace. If I found grace in your eyes, take my mincha from my hand, because I have seen your presence, or your face, like seeing the presence or face of Elohim, and you were pleased with me. So he says, "No, please accept my mincha, because I've come into your presence, like Yehovah accepts our mincha to come into his presence, to draw near to him. Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because Elohim has favored me and because I have all I need." So I think that this is a very good outline of our mental state when we bring mincha to Yehovah. We found grace in his eyes, come into his presence, and he is pleased with us. And he shall bring it to the sons of Aharon, the priests, and he shall take from it his hand filled with flour and oil and all the frankincense. So he brings this flour, oil, and frankincense to the priest, and he takes a big handful of it. The priest shall burn it as a remembrance portion on the altar, and isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. Okay, so the olah is an isha. This remembrance portion which was burnt on the altar is also an isha. The rest of the mincha is for Aharon and his sons, most set apart of the offerings to Yehovah made by fire. And offerings made by fire is the plural, it's a share. So you see, when you bring something to Yehovah, you can't actually go to him in the throne room and say, "I've brought you a present." It's not how it works. He says, when you bring it to me, I have given it to Aharon and to his sons. And when you bring as a means of drawing near a mincha, a present, baked in the oven, it is of unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened thin cakes anointed with oil. But if your means of drawing near is a present for Yehovah on the griddle, it is of fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. Again, he's very precise. He says, you will bring me exactly this. Don't think about bringing your own offerings and what you think is acceptable. You will bring exactly this, exactly what I ask. Divide it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a present to Yehovah. And if your means of drawing near is a present to Yehovah, in a stewing pot it is made of fine flour with oil. You shall bring to Yehovah the present for Yehovah that is made of these, and shall draw near with it to the priest, and he shall, the word here is nagash. Sometimes in Hebrew, when you've got two words, or you're trying to say the same thing twice in proximity to each other, you just use a word which means exactly the same thing. And the word nagash means exactly the same thing as karab. It means to draw near. So, he shall draw near with it to the priest. Remember, a stranger cannot draw near to the tabernacle. These people are allowed to in this circumstance. And the priest will draw near with it to the altar. The priest shall take from the present for Yehovah a remembrance portion and burn it on the altar. So here it's not the person bringing the offering who takes a handful and the priest puts it on the altar. Here the priest takes it to the altar. He draws near with it to the holy altar and he puts it on the altar. And Isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. So both of the remembrance portions are Isha. The rest of the present for Yehovah is for Aharon and his sons, most set apart of the offerings to Yehovah made by fire, of the Ishaya to Yehovah. No present for Yehovah with which you draw near to Yehovah is made with leaven, for you do not burn any leaven or any honey in an offering to Yehovah made by fire. You don't burn any honey or any leaven in an Isha. An Isha cannot have any honey or leaven in. Draw near with them to Yehovah as a means of drawing near of the first fruits, but they are not burned on the altar for a sweet fragrance. So what it's saying is you can draw near with things with honey and leaven in, but you cannot burn them on the altar. They cannot be an Isha, an offering made by fire. Season with salt every means of drawing near of your present to Yehovah, and do not allow the salt of the covenant of your Elohim to be lacking from your present to Yehovah. With all your means of drawing near, you bring salt. And if you draw near with a present for Yehovah of your first fruits to Yehovah, draw near for the present for Yehovah of your first fruits, green heads of the grain, roasted on the fire, crushed heads of new grain, and you shall put oil on it, lay frankincense on it. It is a present to Yehovah. So you prepare the present that you bring. And the priest shall burn the remembrance portion from its crushed grain and from its oil with all the frankincense, and that is an Isha to Yehovah, the remembrance portion being burnt again. Leviticus 3. Okay, we're going to learn about what's called the peace offering in Scripture. It doesn't actually say peace offering again. It's the closest to it saying peace offering. It's not two words saying peace and offering. It's two words that say zabach and shelamim. And shelamim comes from shalom, which means peace. Im is the masculine plural, so it's kind of like pieces or shaloms. And the word zabach doesn't mean offering, it means sacrifice. So literally what that means is sacrifice of shaloms, okay? And if that which he presents, or if the korban, if the means of drawing near is a sacrifice of shaloms, if he is bringing it of the herd, whether male or female, he brings a perfect one into the presence of Yehovah, to the tent of meeting. And he shall lay his head on the head of the offering and slaughter it at the door of the tent of meeting. So he draws near with his means of drawing near, his korban. He puts his head on it and he slaughters it himself. And the sons of Aharon, the priest, shall sprinkle the blood on the altar all around. So he can only draw near so far, they can draw near the rest of the way. And from the Zabach Shelamim, he shall bring an offering made by fire. He shall bring an Isha. So from his peace offering, he brings an Isha. But it's not the entire thing. Okay, he brings it and he kills it. And from it, he brings an Isha, just part of it. And that is the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails. And the two kidneys and the fat that is on them by the loins, the appendage on the liver, which he removes with the kidneys. So this is the part of the offering that he brings to offer to Yehovah as an Isha. In our culture, this is what we're used to, isn't it? Okay, where do you get meat from? You go to the supermarket and you buy a handily wrapped package of meat. What we have in the Torah is quite simply butchery instructions. These things to us seem barbaric. Oh, what? They're cutting out the kidneys of the animal, and then they cut that up, and they give the right shoulder here, and they do this with that, and they do this, the other with the other. To us, it's all done for us. And so this, to us, is much more palatable. We go back a little bit of time, okay, not all the way back to when they would have been slaughtering animals themselves. We go back a little bit of time, we would have had someone like this, wouldn't we? Okay, and they would have been responsible for doing the very things that we are reading about in the book of Leviticus. So this is nothing barbaric. Okay, these offerings to Yehovah are actually means of drawing near to him. But when you draw near to him, he doesn't say just waste all of the meat, kill the meat, and then that's it, it's done, you just throw it away. He says, kill the meat. Then you take the fat that's around the kidneys and around the liver, and that you will offer to me. And the rest you give to the priest, and you eat of it yourself. That's how the peace offering worked. Okay? Very simply, what we will see as we go on in this Torah portion and in the Torah portion next week, Torah portion Tzav, is instructions on how you are to butcher an animal and the way that it should be done. So what you end up with is Yehovah with the fat, and then this bit over here and that bit over there, and everyone gets the meat and everyone's happy. The sons of Aharon shall burn it on the altar upon the olah, which is on the wood, because there would be a burnt offering that was there on the altar. They would offer one in the morning and one in the evening, which is on the fire as an isha, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. So here we've got the olah is an isha, it's an offering made by fire. Okay, the mincha, the remembrance portion of the mincha, is an offering made by fire. And here we've got the fat of the peace offering is an isha, an offering made by fire, a sweet fragrance to Yehovah. And if that which he presents, so in other words, if that with which he draws near is from the flock for a sacrifice of shaloms to Yehovah, male or female, he brings a perfect one. If he's bringing a lamb as his means of drawing near, then he shall draw near with it in the presence of Yehovah. Again, he comes to the door of the tent to meet him. Shall lay his hand on the head of his means of drawing near and slaughter it in front, and the word there is panim, in the face of, literally, of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aharon shall sprinkle its blood on the altar round about. And from the peace offering he shall draw near as an isha to Yehovah, its fat, all the fat tail which he removes close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails. The 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the loins, and the appendage on the liver, which he removes with the kidneys. The priest shall burn them on the altar as food, an offering made by fire, an isha to Yehovah. And if his means of drawing near is a goat, then he shall draw near with it in the presence of Yehovah. This was all about a lamb. And shall lay his hand on its head and slaughter it in the face of the tent of meeting, before it, in the presence of. And the sons of Aharon shall sprinkle its blood on the altar all around. And from it he shall draw near with his means of drawing near as an isha to Yehovah, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails. And the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the loins, and the appendage on the liver which he removes with the kidneys. And the priest shall burn them on the altar as food, an offering made by fire, an isha for a sweet fragrance. All the fat belongs to Yehovah. An everlasting law throughout your generations and all your dwellings, you do not eat any fat or any blood. And since there's so many people that come into this new, when they come to these instructions, I'll just very briefly go over what I went over in Torah portion Tzav. It's the idea that we can't eat any fat or any blood. People think, well, I can't have a rare steak anymore, okay, because that's got both fat and blood in the steak. But they're what we call fat and blood. They're not what Scripture refers to as fat and blood. We can see that it gives the fat that it's talking about. It's the fat that covers the entrails. What we would actually call visceral fat. So we don't need to be going through our meat and cutting out every little bit of fat, because that's meat, isn't it? Okay, you don't eat the fat. When you slaughter an animal, you will find in the animal meat and fat. The fat's around the organs. That's meat though, and you're allowed to eat meat, even if it's got some fat in it. You know, no one would say that that was comprised of two components, meat and fat. We might say that in our culture because that's what we're used to. But if we were used to slaughtering animals, we would know that in the animal there's meat and in the animal there's fat. You eat the meat, but you don't eat the fat. So this is fine. This red color is also fine because this isn't blood, not the blood that the Bible's talking about anyway. Blood the Bible's talking about is the stuff that flows in your veins and your arteries to keep your muscles oxygenated. Okay, it's hemoglobin. It's what gives life to the meat. This isn't hemoglobin. This is what is called myoglobin. Okay, and that's what you find in the meat. But again, it's meat, isn't it? It's part of the meat, and you're allowed to eat meat. You're just not allowed to eat the blood, which flows in the veins and arteries of the animal. So this is visceral fat. In a pig, it will be called lard. In a cow, it will be called suet. You have to be careful with beef tallow. It's not always suet, but often it is suet. So my advice would be, if in doubt, don't have it. Okay, or find out from the manufacturer whether or not they use suet, because this fat is the fat which we are commanded in all your generations you will not eat. Okay, this is the blood that we shall not eat, the blood in the veins and the arteries. Now I want you to consider these three different meats, okay? This meat, we would say, perhaps, well, we can't eat that meat because it's got blood in it. As I say, it doesn't have hemoglobin in, it has myoglobin in the meat. But also, this meat and this meat both have the same substance in. So if we were to not eat this, then we wouldn't be allowed to eat this or eat this for the same reason. You'll notice that this is just paler. Okay, this has myoglobin in. You can see the color in it. That color comes from myoglobin, just as this color comes from myoglobin, but this has more in it. So absolutely, we can still eat steak. No one needs to worry. Leviticus 4 says, and Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, when a soul sins by mistake. Now this is going to be very relevant to us, because by mistake doesn't just mean, whoops, it was an accident. And it doesn't just mean that it was unintentional or that it was done in ignorance. Okay? It's also a sin that is done in error. That would be a better translation of this, a sin that is done in error. Because I think that any of us here would say, as we walk throughout our lives, if we ended up sinning, it was a sin that we made in error. Okay? It wasn't something that we'd intended to do. And there is a vast difference between a sin that is done in error and a sin that is done because you tolerate sin in your life. And when it came to a choice of whether or not you would do something, you just thought, yeah, you know what, I will do it. It's kind of hard not to do it. I should do this or I shouldn't do that. That's not a sin made in error, although it is an error on our part. Okay? It doesn't fall into this category though. Sins that are done in ignorance, sins that were done in error. Against any of the commands of Yehovah, which are not to be done, and shall do any of them. If the anointed priest sins, and that in the Hebrew is the Kohen Mashiach, the Kohen Mashiach sins, bringing guilt on the people, then he shall draw near to Yehovah for his sin. Now, you're going to notice with the sin offering, because I'm probably going to point it out as we go through, but the sin offering is very different. The sin offering isn't a means by which you draw near to Yehovah. That's not what it's about. Okay, he doesn't want you to draw near to him with something that you've brought simply because you've got sin in your life or you sinned against him. That's not a means to draw near to the Creator. But when we sin, we do create distance between us and Yehovah, and we do need to draw back closer into proximity with him, although it's not a means of gaining intimacy. Okay, so then he shall draw near to Yehovah for his sin. So when you sin, it's a sin, it's an error. You repent of that sin. Then you draw back closer to Yehovah, which is sin, the young bull, a perfect one, as a chata'at. Again, there is not two different words. In the Hebrew, it doesn't say sin and then offering. This is the plural of sin. It basically says sins, okay, as sins. Which he sinned, the young bull, a perfect one, as sins, is basically what it says. But again, in the context, we know what Yehovah is talking about, and we know that he's talking about an offering that is made to him. So it's translated in English as a sin offering, a chata'at. And he shall bring, but notice that the word is not karav here, and it's not nagash. He doesn't draw near with this. The word is bo, and bo means to go, or it means to come. Doesn't mean to draw near. So what he's doing here isn't a means of him gaining intimacy with Yehovah. It's a means of him bridging that distance that he's created. So he shall come with the bull to the door of the tent of meeting. Very different flavor, isn't it? In the presence of Yehovah, and shall lay his hand on the bull's head and slaughter the bull in the presence of Yehovah. So a sin offering as well. He comes with it. He doesn't draw near with it. Comes with it, and he slays it in the presence of Yehovah. And the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and come with it to the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times in the presence of Yehovah in front of the veil of the set-apart place. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before Yehovah in the presence of Yehovah. So now, this isn't being done on the altar that is outside the tabernacle. This is being done outside the Holy of Holies, where the golden incense, where the golden altar of incense is, which is in the tent of meeting, and pour all the blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. That is the altar that's outside, the altar of the Olah, as it calls it here, which is at the door of the tent of meeting. Then he takes all the fat of the bull as a chata'at, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat which is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the loins, and the appendage on the liver which he removes with the kidneys, as it was taken from the bull of the peace offering. And you'll see this often throughout Torah. When it's already given instructions about how to do something, it doesn't waste time by going back over it. It says, just as you take these things, the fat from the peace offering, you take it from this sin offering as well in the same way. And the priest shall burn them on the altar of the chata'at. But the skin of the bull and all its flesh with its head and its legs, its entrails and dung, all of the bull he shall bring outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, it is burned. And if the entire congregation of Yisrael strays by mistake, in error, now this is a sin of ignorance, you shall see from the context. It's the entire congregation sinning in ignorance. And the matter has been hidden from the eyes of the assembly. So this is a sin that is in error, that is a sin of ignorance. They have done against any of the commands of Yehovah which are not to be done, and shall be guilty. They're guilty before him. Because for us to be guilty before Yehovah isn't if we intended to do something wrong. Often you can be guilty before Yehovah and you've never intended to do anything wrong. Your conscience isn't defiled. But as to whether or not you are actually guilty before him, that's another matter. So when they find out that they've done something that makes them guilty before Yehovah, when the sin that they have sinned becomes known, then the assembly, and the word here is kahal. And the kahal in Greek is ecclesia, and in the New Testament is translated as church. So then the church shall draw near with the young bull for the sin and bring it to the presence of Yehovah, the tent of meeting. Or sorry, bring it into the presence of the tent of meeting where his presence is. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull in the presence of Yehovah, and the bull shall be slaughtered in the presence of Yehovah. And the anointed priests shall come with some of the bull's blood to the tent of meeting. Again, they're not drawing near with this, because that's not how you draw near, is it? You don't draw near to him by sinning and then saying, oh, can I come close now? The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times in the presence of Yehovah, in the presence of the veil, or in front of the veil, in the face of the veil. And put some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is in the presence of Yehovah, which is in the tent of meeting, and pour all the blood at the base of the altar of Olah. That's the altar that's outside the tent of meeting, which is at the door, the tent of meeting. Then he takes all the fat from it and shall burn it on the altar. And he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull as a chata'at. So shall he do it. And the priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Now this is really important. The priest will make atonement for them, and it will be forgiven them. Because who's our high priest? We know it's Yeshua. So when we're looking at these things, these types of sin, we can see what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. Okay, sins made in error, sins that you've repented of, in other words. Yeshua will make atonement for us, it will be forgiven us, but we have to bring the spiritual correlates of these offerings, and we'll see what they are in part 4 and part 5. And he shall bring the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a chata'at for the assembly. When a ruler sins, when a leader sins, and by mistake, in error, has done against any of the commands of Yehovah's Elohim, which are not to be done, and shall be guilty. And you'll have seen as we're going through, this word guilty is the word asham. It's the word for guilt, it's the word for guilty, and it's also the word for the next offering that we'll see, the final offering, which is the guilt offering. It's just called the asham. So you come before Yehovah with your guilt offering. Literally what it says is you come before Yehovah with your guilt. Okay, and they shall be guilty. Or if his sin which he has sinned is made known to him, then he shall come with his means of drawing near. Again, he's got to close that gap. He comes with something which is a means to close that gap. A buck of the goats, a male, a perfect one, and he shall lay his hand on the head of the goat and slaughter it at the place where they slaughtered the olah in the presence of Yehovah. It is a chata'at. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the chata'at with his finger and shall put it on the horns of the olah, the altar of olah, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of olah, and burn all its fat on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. I don't know why they just suddenly decided to change the translation to more accurately reflect what it says there, but they did. The Zabach Shalamim. And the priest shall make atonement for him with his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. So this is another case. As we're reading through Leviticus 4, we can see what will be forgiven us and what we must do for that to be forgiven. And if any soul of the people of the land sins in error by doing against any of the commands of Yehovah which are not to be done, and shall be a sham, or if his sin which he has sinned shall be known to him, then he shall come with, as his means of drawing near, a female goat. So he doesn't draw near yet. He comes to the presence of Yehovah with something which is a means by which he hopes to draw near again to him. A female goat, a perfect one for his sin which he has sinned. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the chata'at and slaughter the chata'at at the place of the olah. So again, he comes and he slaughters it himself outside the tent of meeting. And the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and shall put it on the horns of the altar of olah and pour all the blood at the base of the altar. Then remove all its fat, as fat is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar for a sweet fragrance to Yehovah, and the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. And if he comes with a lamb as his chata'at, now strangely here as well, it's just a strange little difference. Previously there was no 2 words for sin and offering, but here it says offering for sins, or offering of sins is literally what it says in the Hebrew. He comes with a female, a perfect one. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the chata'at and slaughter it as a chata'at at the place where they slaughtered the olah. So when it says things like this, when it says, you shall do this after the manner, it's saying you shall do it after the way that's already been explained. So when it says slaughter it as a chata'at, it's already explained how that's done. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the chata'at with his finger and shall put it on the horns of the altar of the olah and pour all the blood at the base of the altar. Then he removes all its fat, as the fat of the lamb is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering. And the priest shall burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire, according to the Asher to Yehovah. So the priest shall make atonement for his sin that he has sinned, and it shall be forgiven him. Leviticus 5 says, and when a soul sins in that he has heard the voice of swearing, and is a witness or is seen, or is known but does not reveal it, he shall bear his crookedness or his iniquity. And we've looked at this word before, so I'm not going to go through it, but the word avon also means the consequence of his iniquity. So it says here, he will bear the consequence of his iniquity. And what is it to bear his iniquity? Or when a soul touches any unclean matter, or the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping creatures, and it has been hidden from him, he is unclean and a sham. So wait there. If being unclean is not a sin, why is he guilty before Yehovah? Okay, he will be unclean and guilty. Well, quite simply, it says it's been hidden from him. And we've got to put ourselves in the place of these people back then. They were bringing these offerings, weren't they? And what did it say? You've got to guard yourself from your uncleanness so that you don't defile my tabernacle which is in your midst. So if this person has been made unclean, they didn't know about it, they didn't do the washing and being made unclean until evening, they will have defiled the tabernacle and they'll be guilty before Yehovah. Even though they didn't mean to defile the tabernacle, they still have guilt. When he touches the uncleanness of a man, any of his uncleanness by which he is unclean, and it has been hidden from him, when he shall know it, then he shall be guilty. Or when a soul swears, speaking rashly with his lips, to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man swears rashly with an oath, and it has been hidden from him, when he shall know it, then he shall be guilty of one of these. And this is very interesting, because this is talking about the actual state of being. You are guilty before Yehovah. But it also tells us a lot about our consciences before Yehovah. Okay? When he shall know it, then he shall be guilty of one of these. And that's exactly how it works with the conscience too. And it shall be, when he is guilty of one of these, that he shall confess that in which he has sinned. And this is actually the key to the spiritual sacrifice that we've got to bring. Okay? When you're guilty before Yehovah, you confess that you're guilty. You don't try and bend the word and twist it around to make your actions okay, because you're still going to be guilty. You can't declare yourself not guilty by not admitting it, basically, or making it seem like you're not guilty to other people, or however else that works. Okay, so when he's guilty, he shall confess that in which he has sinned, and shall come with his guilt offering. He shall come with his asham, come with his guilt is literally what it says, to Yehovah for his sin which he has sinned, a female from the flock, a lamb or a female goat as a chata'at, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. And if he is unable to bring a lamb, then he shall come to Yehovah, he who has sinned, with 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a chata'at and the other for a burnt offering. So if he brings a lamb, it's just a chata'at. If he brings the 2, we've got a sin offering and a burnt offering. And he shall come with them to the priest, who shall draw near with that which is for the chata'at first. So the priest is drawing near here. Shall wring off its head from its neck, but not sever it. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood of the chata'at on the side of the altar, one of the birds. And the rest of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a chata'at. And he shall prepare the second as an olah, according to the judgment, according to what we've already been told. And the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin which he has sinned, and it shall be forgiven him. But if he is unable to bring the 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he who sinned shall come with his means of drawing near, for his means of drawing near, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a chata'at. Okay, so what's he doing here? He's bringing grain as a sin offering, but they don't call it a grain offering, do they? He puts no oil on it, nor does he put any frankincense on it, for it is a chata'at. So the distinction is made here between a mincha and a chata'at. When you can't afford the other things, you can't afford the lamb, you can't even afford 2 pigeons, you come with grain. The animals would have been very expensive, which makes it significant that Paul in Acts 21, when he goes to the Council of Jerusalem, they tell him, okay, what we want you to do is we want you to cleanse yourself from your Nazirite vow. And not only that, but we want you to pay for 4 other people to be cleansed from their Nazirite vow as well, all of which involved many animals to be offered to Yehovah. And he shall come with it to the priest, and the priest shall take his hand filled with it as a remembrance portion, burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire. The asher to Yehovah is a chata'at. So just like with the mincha, some of it would be taken and burnt as an isha on the altar to Yehovah. The priest shall make atonement for him for his sin that he has sinned in any of these, and it shall be forgiven him. And it shall be the priests like a mincha. And Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, when a soul commits a trespass and has sinned by mistake against the set-apart matters of Yehovah, okay, so things like the tithe and things like the firstborn of the flock, or anything that you had dedicated to Yehovah, then he shall come to Yehovah as his guilt, a ram, a perfect one from the flock, with your valuation in shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the set-apart place, as an asham, as his guilt, basically. He comes with the money as his guilt. And he shall make good for the sin that is done against that which is set apart, and shall add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and the ram of the guilt offering, and it shall be forgiven him. When any soul sins and has done that which is not to be done against any of the commands of Yehovah, though he knew it not, yet he shall be guilty and shall bear the punishment or the consequence of his guilt. And what is the consequence of his guilt is explained here, that he has to bring this thing to Yehovah. That's the consequence. Think of it like a fine. Okay, you're guilty. I didn't mean to do it. That's all right, but you're still guilty. You've got to bring this thing. Then he shall come to the priest with a ram, a perfect one, from the flock, with your valuation as a guilt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for his mistake he committed unintentionally, though he did not know it, and it shall be forgiven him. It is an asham. It is guilt. He was truly guilty in the presence of Yehovah. Now this is the last chapter. In fact, it's not even the last chapter. It's the last 7 verses that we're going to cover here. Yehovah spoke to Moshe, saying, when any soul sins and committed the trespass against Yehovah and has lied to his neighbor about a deposit or about a pledge or about a robbery, or shall extort from his neighbor, or has found what was lost and has lied concerning it, or did swear falsely so that he sins in regard to any one of these that a man does, then it shall be when he sins that he shall be guilty, that he shall return what he took by robbery, or what he has extorted, or the deposit which was deposited with him, or the lost item which he found. Now, all of these things are Yehovah's mishpatim. Okay, they're his judgments, they're his right rulings, they're his rulings, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so what must be done in this case is the same punishment as if you've sinned against the commands of Yehovah, or you've sinned against Yehovah directly. Okay, you take what was taken and you add 1/5 of its value to it. All that about which he swore falsely, he shall repay its total value, add 1/5 more to it, and give it to whom it belongs on the day of his guilt. Then he comes with his guilt offering to Yehovah, a ram, a perfect one from the flock, with your valuation as a guilt offering to the priest. And the priest shall make atonement for him in the presence of Yehovah, and he shall be forgiven for whatever he did that made him guilty, made him a sham. Now, okay, for the people online, we need to decide what time we're going to come back. So, what do you think, Charlie? Normal time. Okay, so normal time, so it will be 3:15, about 45 minutes, and we'll be back, and we will update people at the end of each part when the next one's going to start so that everyone's on the same page.